السادة المشاهدين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مرحبا بكم مرة أخرى مع سلسلة وثائقيات حول إنتاج العسل في غرب أستراليا. في هذه السلسلة سوف نقوم بعمل حوارات ولقاءات مع بعض منتجي العسل وبعض النحالين، وقد تكون لنا زيارات إلى متاجر العسل، وكذلك قد تكون لنا زيارات إلى مراكز الأبحاث. معكم علي السادة، مدينة بيرث، غرب أستراليا. تحدثنا في الفيديو السابق عن أهمية دور النحال في إنتاج أجود أنواع العسل، مع ملاحظتي أن تربية النحل في غرب أستراليا بجانب كونه عملا هو شغف تتوارثه بعض العائلات أبا عن جد. أبرز هذه العائلات هي عائلة فيوستر، والذين توارثوا تربية النحل ل5 أجيال، ويعتبرون من أكبر منتجي العسل الغرب أسترالي. التقينا بمايك فيوستر، وهو أحد منتجي العسل أصحاب الخبرة، بالإضافة إلى تخصصه في الصناعات التنفيذية المعدنية والزراعية، والذي سيحدثنا عن علاقة عائلته بصناعة العسل، وسيحدثنا عما يميز العسل في غرب أستراليا.
So my family have been producing honey in Western Australia now since 1912. My family now are up to the 5th generation of the family who are working with bees. The main benefits of such a long period of working with bees and producing honey in WA are twofold. The first is just experience, and because it is a family business, it's easy to pass experience from one generation to the next. So from father to son to grandson, and producing high quality honey requires significant experience. My grandfather he and 3 of his brothers were the first lifelong full-time beekeepers. My grandfather was, I think, 12 years old when he became a beekeeper, when he left school, along with 3 of his brothers. And descendants from each of those 4 brothers are now beekeepers. So my grandfather was Jim Fewster, and his brothers Nelson, Norman and Arthur, maybe, they all became beekeepers. Yeah. And so descendants of those 4 brothers are still beekeepers today. And collectively, the Fewster family is by far the largest honey producer in Western Australia. The other thing really about being very long-term beekeepers is just the opportunity, being able to take advantage of the opportunities that arise. Here in Western Australia, most of our honey is produced from land that is held by the government, so native forests, timber reserves, other types of reserves. And access to that public land is governed, it's controlled by the government, and beekeepers have to lease an apiary site off the government. They have to lease their apiary sites off the government. And these sites were taken up in many cases by my family 50 or 60 years ago, and those sites are still within the family today. So very long established beekeepers, over time they are able to acquire more bee sites, they are able to swap their bee sites, trade their bee sites with other beekeepers, and as a product of that, long-term beekeepers are able to put together the best package of bee sites, so they then have the most expertise and the best bee sites, and that produces the best honey.
Yeah. And what distinguishes the WA honey?
Western Australian honey, particularly honey produced from our eucalypt forests, but also the coastal terrain, what is really unique about our honey is what we call the terroir. Terroir is a term that describes all of the factors that contribute to the production of a product. Normally terroir is applied to wine, but it also applies to honey. So in the case of honey production in Western Australia, it comes down to firstly the types of trees, the eucalypts that we produce most of our honey from, the forest itself in which they grow, and the climate. And these three factors in Western Australia are unique. They are globally unique. There is nowhere in the world where large, slow-growing trees like eucalypts survive in such a hostile, arid climate, growing in soil that is almost completely devoid of nutrients. So our eucalypt trees here, our Jarrah, Marri, Carri, they are very highly evolved, and as a consequence of that very highly evolved state, they produce some of the most high quality nectar of all flowering plants in the world, and our bees are selectively bred here in Western Australia to make the maximum benefit of that nectar. So we finish up with what we think is the highest quality, purest honey in the world.
Yeah. And what are the most famous honey in the WA?
The most famous honey, of course, is Jarrah honey. We have here forest fresh Jarrah honey. Jarrah honey is probably the finest, highest quality honey in the world. The chemistry of Jarrah honey is just completely unique. There is no other honey in the world that has the same blend of primary sugars, higher order carbohydrates that produce the prebiotic effect, and then there are the chemicals within it as well that produce the high activity, the antioxidants. There's just a host of chemicals in Jarrah honey, very, very good what we call phytochemicals, chemicals produced by the trees that just make for a honey that has an extraordinarily good flavour, consistency. Jarrah honey, good Jarrah honey will never crystallise, and also all of the health benefits that come from the honey. So Jarrah is unique. It is, in my view, the best honey in the world. But having said all of that, there is another honey that we produce here in Western Australia, which is Carri honey. This is produced from the Carri forests in the southwest of Western Australia. And what is unique about it is that it is produced extremely rarely. So the supply of Jarrah honey is variable, and it's very rare.
Yeah.
But with Carri honey, it can be 5 to 7 years. So for that reason, whereas we might expect to harvest some Jarrah honey every 2 years, we are lucky to harvest Carri honey every 7 to 10 years. So it is a magnificent honey to taste, has very high activity, and it is very rare. So we would say here in Western Australia, Jarrah honey is the most iconic. We would call this the sort of the Western Australian golden honey is Jarrah honey, but Carri honey we call the jewel of the southwest because it is such a rare and special honey.
So Jarrah honey is harvested every 2 years, and Carri honey is 7 to 10 years. Every 7 to 10 years you can harvest it.
Yes, it's entirely variable. So Jarrah honey, we normally expect to get a commercial harvest every 2 years. So by commercial harvest, this is to say the large beekeepers, my family would move all their bees into the Jarrah forest to collect Jarrah honey. We normally expect to, as I said, to get a commercial harvest every 2 years, but sometimes it can be every 3 years. Only the biggest and most established honey packing businesses can ensure a supply of high quality Jarrah honey for continuously. But in respect to Carri honey, yes, the supply, historically my grandfather always told me that they would expect to harvest Carri honey once every 7 years, but we've actually seen intervals of up to 20 years between commercial Carri flows. Fortunately, we've had some Carri produced quite recently, And so for the first time in quite a long time, we actually have some carry honey available to sell to our customers.
It's good to hear that. And I see here a Mary.
Marri honey is Marri honey again is again in terms of its international competitiveness. Marri honey is an extraordinarily high quality honey. It's a very high activity honey. It also is very rich in many of these beneficial phytochemicals. What is good about Marri honey is that the tree that it comes from, the eucalypt, it normally flowers every year. So we normally expect to get a reasonable flow or a harvest of Marri honey every year. So of all of these high activity special honeys in Western Australia, Marri is the one that we would normally have available with a consistent flow. But one thing about Marri honey is that its local name is red gum. It comes from a tree that has a red coloured sap that comes out of the tree. And for that reason, Marri is becoming very popular in North Asia because people from North Asia like the word red. And so Marri is becoming a very popular honey. But we like to include it in our range because it provides a lower cost product which is still of exceptionally high quality. So the three honeys, Jarrah, Marri, Carri, they represent really the three iconic honeys of Western Australia.